Do you feel like you're in some kind of final showdown with your own self? Like all the things that have antagonized you in your personal myth this year, the people, the situations that have triggered you, that have felt like villains and really pushed against you, all of that has come full circle, and now there is this very confronting wisdom within yourself that has turned the mirror and gone, you're the antagonist. This is another Kundalini Chrism yoga update, your mother tongue, and I'm going to be speaking in terms of the myth wheel again. So we're right at the end of our annual myth, right? It starts in March last year. We go through a whole myth cycle, and we're now culminating in our myth, our personal myth. It's an organic living pattern. And we're at the third act climax. Okay, so the third act climax in a movie, for example, is when the hero or heroine faces off with the villain or the antagonist. Say it's an action movie, right? And they go sword to sword with each other, and the hero finally wins. And they defeat the villain. So that's how it might play out in a movie. But in the third act climax, it's the final climactic moment of a movie or a myth, right, in your life right now. And how it plays out in our lives is that climactic moment where the hero or heroine, because we're all the hero and heroine, and we're also all the antagonist, and we are facing off with our villain, and it's so penetrating that we realize the villain is actually ourselves. So whenever a myth cycle starts out, we set off on a quest and a journey of self-discovery. Something leads us out, and we have incidences. The great mother, the play of life, brings situations into our lives that challenge us and antagonize us. So I know for myself, all the situations I've had this year where I've been like, well, that person's got issues, and that person's a hypocrite, that person's this, that person's that, I'm thinking this, you know? Seeing the antagonizer as separate from myself. Because when we are in our myth cycle and the mother is trying to reveal an aspect of ourselves to us, when we're in the journey, we can't yet see it. It's still unconscious, but she's bringing it up the system. She's alchemizing it, right? So she's bringing it through the 7 stages of alchemy. So we aren't conscious of it. So we are in separation at first. We see these things as outside of ourselves. The antagonizer is coming against me. What's their problem? But when we reach the third act climax, we're also in the 7th stage of alchemy, which is the final stage of alchemy. And it's coagulation, where opposites are solidified into one. So polarity is solidified into one. Right? When thine eye becomes single, thy body is full of light. So through the myth cycle, we have a kind of polarity experience of the wound that's trying to work its way out, because it's been in separation inside our own psyche and unconscious. It's a rejected part of the self, or a hidden part of the self. So we see when that wound is being reflected in antagonists and triggers in our lives, we see it as separate. We see it as like, oh, well, they got a big problem, right? But as the wound has worked up and it reaches this point now of the 7th stage, and there's no more polarity, the wound and the healing, or the villain and the hero, become one. So there's this very confronting stage of seeing that everything that's been challenging you this year is actually in you. You do that thing. The thing that you see in everybody else, the projection, is actually something that you are doing. Or you are doing or desiring or allowing. It is not at all separate from you. It is you. And this is the great, beautiful fulfillment of the third act climax in the myth wheel and the hero and heroine's journey, is that it's the unification of these polarities, right? So the shadow is now right up against you, and it is you. It's very confronting stuff. And they even call this stage in storytelling the master of two worlds. So the hero becomes the master of two worlds, meaning there is no more two. There was I'm here, and that us and them, me and the antagonist, inner world, outer world. These things were separate. But as we reach the end of the myth wheel where we are right now, we understand that these things are not separate, and we become the master of two worlds because we understand that they are one and the same. And the hero, and they also call this moment in storytelling the gift of the goddess. So the goddess is always leading us out of polarity and into seeing that all is within, but it takes time. It has to be lived and grown like a tree. That's why she's a mother. She nurtures us into this space. So when we reach the third act climax, and if we're brave enough to face off with the fact that this shadow, the thing we see in the other, is the thing we do. It's a hard confrontation. We receive the gift of the goddess, which is the philosopher's stone. When these two things, the antagonist and the hero, become one because of the bravery of the hero to admit this to themselves, you receive, that's true coagulation or solidification in alchemy, the final stage we're at right now, the seventh stage, and you receive the philosopher's stone because of that. And you return into your ordinary world having evolved higher. But it takes a lot of chutzpah at this last stage to admit these things to ourselves. It's been very hard for me to admit this stuff to myself. It's been kind of devastating, to be honest. Yeah. And another thing about the hero's journey is that the hero is only a hero because they sacrifice themselves. Okay, that's an element of the hero. They take action. Foundational element of the hero. They take action for themselves, for their lives, and they sacrifice themselves, but not in a martyr kind of way where I'm here to rescue you, I'm a codependent, sacrificing myself. No, rather, they sacrifice this old self. This old self that couldn't see that all these triggers and antagonisms were my problem. I'm doing this thing. I'm doing this thing that's triggering me. Now, what am I going to do about that? I'm going to, when you admit that to yourself, when you admit that the problem is actually coming out of the self, that's a sacrifice of the old version of you. And there's a rebirth. So that's the crucifixion of the old self, right? The dying and rising God is this myth wheel as well, right? And there's a crucifixion of the self, the old self, on the tree, the mother. The tree is this great cycle, this great cycle. We see the tree in the circle, the cultic tree, all of this. Jesus is crucified on the tree because he crucifies an old version of himself each cycle, bravely, because it's very hard to admit this stuff to ourselves. But if you admit it and you move through all the big feelings and you shift the patterns, you are reborn as something new, and that's the gift of the goddess. You have the philosopher's stone now, and you are free to live in a new way. You are freed from something. All those things that were patterns, that were triggers, that had a hook in you. Now that you identify where it's happening in you, and you own that, you are now free from it. It's when we separate ourselves from it, we go, it's got nothing to do with me. That's happening outside of me. That's the antagonist doing that. That's the villain. Then it owns us. Then we aren't free from it. Yeah. So when we see this and admit this, this is the great philosopher's stone. This is the end of the cycle. And I just want to also say this. This all landed a few days ago. And this is how I know about this cycle. It's through self-observation and observation of what nature is doing with me. And I was sitting there and the kingfisher came and visited me, right? It's a rare bird that can see very deeply through water. It can penetrate, it can see way through. And it's been visiting me for about a month. And I knew when I first saw it a month ago, I was like, oh, what am I not seeing? Because whenever I see this animal, it's telling me, I've got sight, you need to see, you need to penetrate what you're not seeing about yourself. Even my eyes were itchy and having issues this last month, and I was like, what am I not seeing? This kingfisher visited me a couple days ago over the weekend on Tibetan New Year, funny enough. And as I had an encounter with it and communion with the creature, it left, and I started journaling. And everything that I journaled was just me saying, like, that situation that I was so upset about and that antagonist, me, and this is how I'm doing it. This is the root of the issue. Oh my gosh, this is all me. This is all me. I am the thing that has been bothering me the whole time. It's me, it's me, it's me. And as I was journaling this, I looked up and a huge eagle flew just like very low down over my head. And the eagle always represents to me another shamanic encounter with the mother's consciousness, that the serpent has been apprehended. So there's the eagle and the serpent, and the eagle apprehends or catches the serpent when we see what has been hidden in us. Satan is ignorance, or the hidden thing. When the serpent is writhing around in us and we don't see the ignorant parts of ourselves or these unconscious patterns. So when I saw the eagle fly over, I realized, here comes the philosopher's stone, because there's vision. The eagle also represents vision. So yeah, just to give you that little anecdote, because this whole pattern that I share with you has been through self-observation of my own life and my own awareness, realizing when this changes or shifts and what nature is doing with me to shift those things. So we have been given great sight now. We see right through, right? Just like the kingfisher, we see all the way down. And I'm just encouraging you to be brave with that. Admit it. It's safe to admit it. It's safe to admit that you're the problem. that the projection, the trigger is actually in you. The thing that's triggered you is what you do. And in admitting it, like I said, there's no more polarity. The polarity dissolves. Master of two worlds, the gift of the goddess, the philosopher's stone. And that prepares you, and you enter a whole new way of living, a whole new level of freedom, and you are prepared for your next cycle that's going to open up soon. And this is coming at the perfect time, by the way, because next week is Mahashivratri. On the 26th of February, I'll be observing at my local temple. And that is when it's a very ancient fertility tradition where Shiva, consciousness, and Prakriti, nature, come together, right? So Shiva Shakti come together, Father, Mother come together, Virgin Mother, Earth Mother come together, whatever two forms you want to describe them as, but they come together. And spirit and matter have resolved into one. There's no more polarity, there's no separation, there's a resolution. So Mahashivratri is actually perfectly timed, and it's alchemically timed. It's the beauty of the traditions in India. I'd love to know if you feel any of this, if you know what I'm talking about, what has confronted you. And yeah, what do you feel like you are resolving? Sending love.